Jenny Jiao Hsia, co-director on Consume Me, spent 10 years of her life making this one game. She poured her soul into the semi-autobiographical story about the pains of being a teenage girl. Consume Me has already earned multiple awards in our industry and 2 nominations at our ceremony on Thursday. Consume Me is a game that genuinely spoke to an audience that doesn't always feel heard. And her customers, she's a voice of a generation that is afraid to speak. And I can't wait to listen to what she says next. So please help me warmly welcome to the D.I.C.E stage, Jenny Jiao Hsia.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Jiao Hsia. You may know me as Q-Dork on social media, and I'm here in Las Vegas this week to eat 2 Gordon Ramsay beef Wellingtons, back to back. Though I figured while I was in town, I might as well stop by D.I.C.E and talk about my deepest professional insecurities for 15 minutes. And then tomorrow night, possibly win an award. I made an autobiographical narrative role-playing game called Consume Me. And that's a fancy way of saying I made a game about feeling stupid, fat, and ugly in high school. I spent about 2.5 high school careers worth of time working on Consume Me. I basically earned a PhD in making one video game. Yep, I sure learned a lot of technical skills along the way, though don't worry about that. Today, I'm mostly here to dazzle you with tales of my discipline, my endurance, my tendency to overthink and waste time and underpay myself, and the objective fact that I am literally the creative director of an award-winning video game. Consume Me received widespread critical acclaim. It was great. A guy who works at NPR recognized me in the street once. Unfortunately, my bank did not read the New York Times feature about my game. The joke's on my bank account, though. That Gordon Ramsay beef Wellington here in Las Vegas costs $73.95, and that's the cost of like half an hour's rent in Manhattan. If someone else out there yearns to follow in my footsteps and make an award-winning indie narrative game the hard way, please, before you do that, heed my words. Let me offer you some lessons I learned. Let me tell you about what I'll do differently when I make my next video game. Together, we can all be eating 3 beef Wellingtons each in the bright future. I started Consume Me in 2016. That's not 10 years ago. Your math is wrong. I was a student in Bennett Foddy's prototyping class at NYU, and in this class, students make a new game every week. Basically, the teacher says, here's the theme, you have 1 week, good luck, and then makes his own game about climbing a mountain very badly. A bunch of the many prototypes I made in that class became the mini games in Consume Me. In 2018, some GIFs of mine went semi-viral. And that's good, by the way. My game got featured at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and that's the world's leading museum of art, design, and performance. Of course, classy folks like yourselves all definitely already knew that. My collaborator, A.P. Thompson, helped me build a vertical slice, a version of the game we use to pitch to potential investors and publishers at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco that year. In 2019, we signed with Kowloon Knights and got about $300,000. This was certainly exactly enough money for us to finish the game in like maybe 2 years. Unfortunately, it would wind up taking 6. In 2020, I moved into my late grandma's tiny apartment to keep costs down. I still live there now. It had a mold problem, and it still does today. In 2022, we hired 3 more collaborators, Kelly on art, Violet on sound design, and Coda on music. We released Consume Me in September 2025. For most of development, we paid ourselves around $2,000 a month. So if you're wondering how indie games are made, it's not blood, sweat, and tears. It's more like blood, sweat, tears, and genuine shock that my apartment somehow doesn't also have bed bugs. Lesson number 1, Consume Me started as a collection of mini games, and that's great in the beginning. Making small things quickly feels like making progress. Prototypes are screenshotable and GIFable. Showing off your work feels great. However, prototypes are not a game. They're a trap. When you post a GIF of a prototype on social media, people tell you, I'd play this game. And then 10 years later, they don't. Buddy, let me tell you, if even half of the people who retweeted my GIFs had bought my game, I'd be staying in this hotel tonight. A viral video clip of a cute moment in a video game prototype can get you rich quick in the social currency of likes and retweets. Though that's only 2% of the work. The other 98% is figuring out how those crucial moments fit coherently into something bigger. AP always says, we tried a lot of ideas and a lot of different combinations, but the game didn't click until we had a critical mass of systems in place, which is a fancy way of saying we had to build a whole lot of the game before we could even tell we were making a game. And if I could do it again, I'd spend less time making mini games and more time answering the real questions like, how does the story flow and how do we actually make it fun? I learned this slowly because I kept getting distracted by college. AP and I call this the dangly arm situation. Like, once I spent an entire week getting a literal dangly arm to work, like the physics, joints, the whole thing, and I was really proud of it. And then AP comes over, watches it for about 5 seconds, and goes, Jenny, this is literally in the game for 2 seconds. When I reflect on this, I realize if you don't train yourself to see the bigger picture, you will fall into the Zeno's paradox of game development, where every improvement you make gets smaller and smaller, and before you know it, 5 years go by, and it's 2025, and the single-pane glass windows in your late grandmother's apartment offer 0 protection from harmful UV rays. Lesson number 2. I thought making my dream game would feel like a dream job, and it did feel like a dream job. On the other hand, it turns out that dream jobs are just a type of job. Even if I ever get access to a time machine, I'm gonna go back in time and tell my younger self to consider dreaming about big, pillowy piles of cash. My dream job happens to be a job where you have to actually show up, even when you don't feel inspired, even when it's boring, even when you can't breathe because you just cooked breakfast, your kitchen has no exhaust fan, and your living room windows don't open. Every morning, when I opened Unity and saw that friendly ghosts hadn't finished my game for me overnight, I remember this quote by Ben Esposito, and it goes something like this. Nobody told me when you make a video game, you have to make the whole thing. We started working on Consume Me full time. And when we had started working on Consume Me full time, I had just recently graduated college, and I basically had no studio experience. So I had to learn stuff that seems super obvious now, like tracking hours, planning sprints, finishing tasks. And here's my honest takeaway. Discipline does not kill or even harm creativity. Discipline turns creativity into a finished game. Lesson number 3. Small teams are actually great, and I'm glad we stayed small. For a voice-driven game like Consume Me, a small team keeps that work coherent, personal, and emotionally unwell. And here's the catch. A small team doesn't eliminate the work. It just compresses the work. So for most of development, our core team was just me and AP. And later, we brought on a few more collaborators part-time. Unfortunately, we never had the invisible roles covered full-time. No producer, no QA, no marketing, no operations, which means the game didn't just have to get made. Someone also had to do all the boring stuff, like answering emails, contacting our accountant, paying a lawyer to look over agreements. And without this stuff, the game could never actually get finished. And here's the truth. The project only worked because AP has terrifying discipline. He showed up every single day, even when I didn't want to. And believe me, there were a lot of days when I didn't want to. AP was basically the engine, and on a tiny team, the most disciplined person becomes the programmer, the designer, the writer, and then, against his will, the producer. And that's too much for one person who's getting paid less than 7 figures. So yeah, staying small saved money, yet it costs time, burnout, and stability. And that taught me something crucial. What we did was not a strategy. It was a miracle. I know some people who say finishing any video game is a miracle, and in our case, our multi-award-winning video game was practically an accident. Lesson number 4. We hired Kelly as our background artist. And I'll be honest, I was intimidated at first. I was like, oh no, Kelly's gonna notice that I don't know what I'm doing. AP already knew that. I didn't need 2 people to know that. In all of my prior projects, I was the only artist. I didn't know how to share my role without losing my identity or potentially our friendship, so I felt insecure. Then, it turned out to be the best decision I made. Working with someone great does not dilute your vision. It sharpens it. It made the game better, and it made me better. So my takeaway is, put your ego aside and hire someone who makes you feel threatened. Not like actually threatened, like don't hire someone just because they have a knife. You know what I mean. Like, please be serious. Okay, lesson number 5, the biggest one. I need a producer. Not because I'm lazy, but because my brain needs structure. I used to think the hardest part of making a game was design or writing or programming, and that's not quite right. The hardest part is sitting at the desk and turning on your computer and choosing to do the least glamorous task in the universe. The same thing you did yesterday, all day today. And the hardest part isn't creativity, it's consistency. I love AP. He's the reason Consume Me exists on Steam and not in a folder on my laptop labeled Final version 2, real this time. But AP is not the right person to make me do consistent work because he's already doing 4 jobs. And unlike the character based on myself in Consume Me, I leave many of my to-do lists unchecked. Not because I'm lazy, it's because I look at my to-do list and I consider that eternally delicious question, what if I too didn't? So for the next game, I want structure that exists on purpose, not structure that happens because we've already spent the majority of our 20s working on the same project and that we're terrified that we'll run out of money because we launch the game, before we launch the game, you know. I need someone who will look me in the eyes and say, Jenny, what did you get done today? What are you doing tomorrow? Also, stop looking at social media. It's like 80% bots and liars on there. Honestly, I need someone like my ballet teacher, because she can really scare the shit out of me, and it's extremely productive. If Rockstar had hired her 10 years ago, I think GTA 6 would have beaten Claire Obscura Expedition 33 at the Game Awards. So what's next? On a whim that I still don't fully understand, 139 days ago, I started posting one TikTok a day until Consume Me sells 1 million copies. So today is day 139 of posting every day until Consume Me sells 1 million copies. Aside from that, I've started my next project recently, and I don't quite have the basis for a mega viral GIF yet, though the concept is real. My next game is about adults learning ballet. And before you get the wrong idea, it's not a graceful fantasy. It's the opposite. Because ballet is a performance art that is secretly about precision, shame, and suffering. I don't have all the answers yet. I have, however, identified several of the questions. If Consume Me was about feeling stupid, fat, and ugly in high school, I think the story ahead is what happens when that feeling doesn't go away. It just gets more expensive. So, yeah, it's about discipline, it's about performance, it's about wanting something you might not be built for and doing it anyway. Also, it's gonna be really, really funny, so just think like Dark Souls, but with better posture. And here's my last slide. Before anyone feels bad for me because I have to fly back to New York City and into my grandmother's tiny, moldy, unventilated apartment, please don't. Plot twist, that apartment is seconds away from Central Park West. It has a 100 walk score, and you couldn't beat that location if you tried. As for my career, I have options. Of course, I am always open to better ones. So if you want to fund the story ahead, yes, that's my Venmo up there. $3.2 million should cover it. I promise I won't take the money, buy a yacht, and sail away, never to be seen again. I suppose if you don't trust me, you can just come talk to me after this. I promise I'm frugal, I've shipped an award-winning video game, and I will do it again. Thank you.